You're listening to Inclusive AF with Jackye Clayton and Katie Van Horn.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Inclusive AF podcast. This is Katie Van Horn.
And this is Jackye Clayton.
Welcome.
Whatever day it is. I hope your day is going good and your week is going better.
Absolutely. It's Sunday.
Whoop, whoop.
I don't know when this is actually going to go
I was
live, but it's Sunday today for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about influence.
Yes, influence. And
an influencer, if you will, and
allies.
Okay, I like this.
Because
I like this a lot.
That comes into play. And one of the things that's really interesting is that you hear, when we used to talk about influence, it was always like, you would think about people who have influence in your life, like your teachers or your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then now, especially with social media, the word influence has been bastardized to mean something completely different.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you don't consider yourself an influencer. I want you to share why you feel that way, and then we're going to talk about why you're wrong.
Thanks. It's fun being friends with Katie. It's so much fun.
This will be a great podcast.
Well, there's a couple things. One of the things is I feel like influencers do things with that intention of being an influencer, right? Like you feel like, oh, I have to do a show and talk about insert VPN brand here,
right,
with the intention of getting that audience. And I started doing this just to share information, and the validation was just somebody else saying, oh my gosh, that's cool, like look what I found, look, I can find candidates, I can do this. And so I never really sold a product, right? I've never really sold a product. But then people said, oh, they want to hear what you think about that product.
Right.
And I never see things like, I don't know if something flies off the shelf. Nothing has ever gone viral. Oh my gosh, iSims ran out of licenses today.
Because of Jackye Clayton.
Because of Jackye Clayton. So I always feel like I don't influence anyone. I encourage, I support. So I always feel like I'm not an influencer.
Okay. Are you ready for why you're wrong?
Sure, Katie. Awesome.
No. So my response to you was, yes, you are an influencer. And the example that I would share is, it's something that I actually just heard yesterday from the amazing Trent Shelton, who, if you are not following him on social media, do it immediately. He is a former NFL football player. He actually played for Baylor as well. So Jackie's hometown team. Say that again. What is that?
Sick 'em Bears.
Bears. I see.
Yeah, we sick 'em.
All right, then.
I don't sick 'em.
So that's what's happening in Texas. And anyhow, Trent Shelton, he's amazing. Very, very, just every word that he said when I was listening to him yesterday was so awesome and so heartfelt and so authentic. And obviously you guys have heard me say the word authentic about 1,000 times already. And I'll continue to say it because I think it's so important. But he was talking about the fact that, he was hosting a webinar, a talk, whatever it was, and he only had 100 participants. And so he was kind of bummed out and feeling like, oh, I'm not really reaching the amount of people that I would have wanted to, whatever it might be. And 100 might be wrong. It might have been like 10. I don't remember. Whatever the number was, it was not what he wanted. He wanted it to be a larger audience. And one of the participants kind of came to him afterwards and said, I know you were disappointed in the numbers, but please know, I was actually broadcasting that to my school of 1,000 people and sharing that with 1,000 additional people. And I think that's such an important thing to think about, is that you have no idea how much your voice is going to extend. And I think another example of this, and it's one that you and I just recently talked about, is that book, and I'm going to forget the name of it, around like AI and technically wrong.
Yes, technically wrong. Great.
Technically wrong. Yeah. And I read that book probably 2.5 years ago. I can't even remember when. And I have shared that book with probably about 6 different people, maybe even more, to say, if you are in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, you must read this book. If you are building technology for diversity and inclusion, you must read this book. And I think that's also like the influence that we don't realize we have, is being able to write a book or share a topic or whatever it might be, and you just don't know who's on the receiving end of it. How many people are actually watching?
That's right. You don't, and it's hard to do the impact, right? Because there is what we call in this industry, we call it like diversity fatigue, where you're just get tired because it's like, I've said this a million, why isn't anybody listening? And you don't realize that people really, some people are listening, and you won't know some of that turnaround. And that's why I feel like allyship comes into play when somebody has influenced you in your life that may be underrepresented, or people don't know who they are, to be the one to, it might not be a formal allyship, but to make spaces for other people that, like, you share the book, that's like being an ally for that person, or you invite that person into with your friends, and sharing that information is so important, so that we can be inclusionary and find other voices. Because Katee, I mean, seriously, we do a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of connecting, but we could also just sit in a room for a week and be like, we would have had the answers to all the world's problems.
Solved it all. Done.
But it's like
sitting by my pool with a cocktail in hand.
World's problems.
We've figured it out. Yeah, all good.
2 days max.
Yes,
give us 2 days.
For sure.
But I mean, the thing is too, is that because people do get to the point where it's like, this is such a big issue, I don't know if I can do anything.
Right.
But it's amazing how, so for example, I was working on a job and I had a sourcer that was working with me, a junior sourcer who's been in the industry for like 5 minutes. And what was interesting, he never did anything within diversity. And then he was assigned to do my sourcing. And one day he just came to me because he was so frustrated that there were so many non-diverse people in this certain role, and was just like, why is this happening? And he came to me from a place of genuine concern, because he was able to see that there's not a lot of African American females in supply chain. And he wanted to know why, and where does supply chain come from, and all of these different things. And we had to go all the way back to like the Industrial Revolution for him to understand why this happened. Why does it work like that? And so I was speaking to the CEO of the company, and I said, right now, today, you have like a junior sourcer, but you are going to have a great diversity recruiter on your hands if you keep nurturing this person. So it's influence to that guy.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I think that's that's in my mind, like the everyday allyship. That's the way I kind of categorize that.
I like that.
Is, it's when no one's watching, when you aren't on a stage, when you aren't on Twitter with however many followers you have, when you aren't, on a podcast, whatever it might be, how are you actually, what actions are you taking to support people from underrepresented groups? What are you actually doing to make sure that other voices are heard? So this is one I actually heard recently that I have been trying very hard to be thoughtful about. And that is the Amazon review. So, 2-3 months ago, all of us bought every book possible on anti-racism, and we were buying from Black authors, and we were buying from people that we hadn't heard from before, from, different BIPOC. And BIPOC.
Tell the people what BIPOC is.
Black, Indigenous, people of color. We were doing all of those things that were great. Absolutely financially support them. Yes. But then the second step to that was, now go review, if you enjoyed it, go review them on Amazon so that they can move higher up the SEO ranks for Amazon. And that was something that I was like, oh, shoot. Yeah, I would not have thought of that. And I absolutely need to do it. And not that, you know, not that anyone's listening to my reviews because I'm not an influencer on Amazon.
Yes, they are. Yes,
but yes, they are. Yeah. And that's the whole point is, you know, that kind of that next step that you need to take. And it's one thing, it's the, you know, the awareness piece and the learning piece that so many of us are going through right now. But it's then what do you do about it? And what are the, you know, this is where our influence matters. And that's, you know, and you've heard me say this before, you know, as a white woman, do I have the lived experience of people that I am, you know, focusing on and trying to support through the work that I do? No, I don't have the lived experience, but I can bring them along with me to say, hey, listen to Jackye, listen to whomever that has this lived experience, and it's great. But it's also the influence that I have to get people in front of other folks and to say, maybe it's not me on this one. Maybe it is somebody else that has that lived experience, and that is great. And I think that's something else that, like, from an influence perspective, we talk about, you know, follow someone on social media that doesn't look like you, doesn't have the same beliefs that you do, things like that. And I think that's so important because you start to go, oh, wow, I'd never thought about it that way. Oh, wow, this is something I didn't know. Or, oh, wow, this is a book I want to read or whatever. And as folks are sharing, that just the groundswell builds and you start to have different perspectives and learn different things. And you're not just on Facebook going, oh, wow, that everyone agrees with me on what I said. And so I must know what I'm talking about. No, you want people that are having those opposing views or having that different point of view and different lived experiences to say, have you thought about it this way? Right. So I think that influence of others is so important as well.
You know, you brought something up that is, I want to share a story that I think is really interesting. We are always learning and growing, and growing and getting different experiences and sharing different things. And for you and you as a white woman and me as a Black woman, there was something really interesting that I didn't realize happened until this past year. The last year or so, or was it 2 years ago? I don't know. We were in New York City, whatever that was, October 2 years ago, maybe.
You and me?
Was that last year?
No.
Yes, it was. Year.
No, I think it was this year. Pretty sure.
Oh.
I mean, it feels like 14 years ago.
It was like 5 months ago. Okay, sorry. This past year, we were in New York City.
What were we doing, Jacqueline?
We were at an event.
And what were we talking about?
We were presenting our diversity, maturity, whatever. I'll get to it, Katie. It was the diversity.
Take your part. Sorry.
I can't even
I'll just
say
take
it.
a sip of water. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. So, maturity model, the diversity recruiting maturity model at HireConf to other human resource and recruiting practitioners. But during that time, I was speaking with a CEO of a company, and as well as someone that I would consider an ally, both white men. And they started having a conversation that went from being inclusionary versus being, it's the same thing, like I should be able to say whatever I want. It's my right to say whatever I want. To all of a sudden, it broke left to you're anti-American because you're not supporting the laws of the United States for free speech. Which turned in, you're not white enough, you're not patriotic enough. It was like this whole side
all
conversation.
The way left.
And I was like, I go, oh my God. I was like, almost started crying just because I was like, what is this? And they said, oh, you've never had that conversation before? I was like, they don't usually let us in those conversations.
I don't want to be in that conversation.
This is a totally not Black person conversation. Never in a million years. The way that they were going, I could never, it had to be being white enough meant being American, right? I say that to say, it was one person who I considered an ally, like sticking up for the greater good. And then this other person, it didn't matter that I was upset by the language that was going in there. It was like, you shouldn't be upset because it's my right kind of thing, which was like a whole power struggle. And I was like frozen because I was like in shock. And then it took someone being of a different voice to have that influence on the same gender, same race person for them to understand what they were saying. And the reason I brought that up is because you talk about, as we're talking about influence, there are times when we have to lean on each other or lean on your allies, because there are times when I just don't know if what I'm going to say is going to get through. And maybe it's somebody else. And what I hear a lot in teaching organizations or with peers, they'll say, well, who wants to hear from a middle-aged white guy about diversity? And I always say, all your middle-aged white guy friends want to hear from a middle-aged white guy about diversity. That's where your influence is. And we don't talk about how much influence. It's like, if you have the majority of the seats at the table, the only way we're going to change it is if middle-aged white guys share the information with other people. There is a need. Right. And there are moments when I've been like, Katie, I need you to unravel this, because this is what came out and I don't understand. Or when we have to talk to other groups, other underrepresented groups, to make sure that we're saying the right things. It's important for people to know that we all get hung up and we're afraid of saying something wrong. The difference, I think, is that we'll say it and then ask if we're saying it wrong, and then we'll fix it. We're not afraid to have difficult conversations. But I just thought it was fascinating that so many middle-aged white men will say, no one wants to hear from me about diversity, when they don't realize that is, regardless of what's going on in the news or how we're managing it, that still is where the power lies and where the influence lies.
Power. That's actually what you just said right there is spot on. I think the power dynamic and the power struggle, whatever it might be that and let's be clear, 99% of the entire conversation around white supremacy and around power is driving so much of the angst and issues that we currently have in the United States. In my opinion, it's a power piece where the dominant group who has held the power for so long is losing some of that power, and they're afraid. And so they're fighting it. And we get that. But it's also God, how cool would it be if we had a sharing of power, and how amazing, like if you think about the United States and think about the fact that, we're the melting pot and all of these wonderful things where all these different people and countries have come here, moved here, and it's the American dream and all those things.
I like to call it the tossed salad, but as you were.
That's a different podcast. So that, I think it is like what we could give and what we could get from actually like sharing power and giving people who haven't had power in the past power. I think that changes the entire dynamic in a great way, but people are afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of all of these things. And to your point, you do have that Eurocentric idea of the way things should be, that white is right.
Yes.
And that is such an unfortunate thing that that's what we've bred in the United States from day one. And it's wrong. And so how do we think about it differently, and how do we, sure, you can say whatever you want to say because of the Constitution. Sure, you bet. Free speech all day long. Great. But is what you're saying actually helping or hurting?
Right.
And to your point, from a power perspective, you shouldn't have to be the one every time to say something. And I know so many people who are that marginalized person, or are from that underrepresented group, or are the only, that you're like, oh my God, do I always have to be the one? Do I always have to be the one that raises my hand? Or is it's that whole angry Black woman, or whatever, or, spicy Latina, or whatever you want to call it, all of these different things. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be, I, as a white woman, fighting for and speaking up and saying things that aren't right, period.
Right.
Done. Sentence is done. Not, I'm doing this because I think I want to get, because I get something out of it or anything like that. This is the right thing to do. And this is what we should be driving in this country.
I
don't know
agree
if
with
that made
you.
any sense. I just kind
A
of went
little bit. I liked it.
Okay.
I was there. But I'm about to say something that's about to blow your mind. And we
Let's
have to
hear
add
it.
this link. Girl. There is a video that's called
Okay.
Music Theory and White Supremacy.
Okay.
So if you've ever, so people who don't know, and this is like, I don't even know if this podcast will ever get made. So I was a classical violinist. My son plays the cello. My daughter plays electric acoustic guitar, the banjo. Todd doesn't play anything, but he's fun. So
We keep him around anyhow.
so what they were talking about is they teach music theory, and that's when you learn about the notes and the rests and what is supposed to be there. But all of the basis of music theory is based on 4 like German European people from the 18th century. Like, and so they were saying there's no other music considered in music theory, like Indian music, African music, different percussion. None of it has any place, 0, none in music theory, to the point where there have been articles that because you have to have like rhythm and meter and all of these things based on music theory to be a song, that hip hop isn't music based on it. What'd you do? You hurt yourself. I know you weren't in shock because hip hop wasn't music. That was too much of a response.
Olive just scratched me. I'm being attacked by my cat. But actually, yes, I am exclaiming because holy moly.
Right. And it started this guy. So then we found out all of this. The person who wrote about this saying this does not include other music was from like 1840. It was like written down. Like, this music theory is 18th century European German music only and should not be considered, something like that, blah, blah, blah. I'll put the link. And it's like, it was written in like 1884 that they should no longer teach music theory like this. And yet they still do. And he was saying, look at how this works. There was an Indian woman teaching Indian music theory. And what it was talking about is what we call it in Indian music theory and what we call it in traditional 18th century European music history, and how you can teach the different styles. And because of the way that we're taught, other types of music are not allowed to exist. So when I listened to it, and it's like 40, I mean, it's a long one. So as I'm listening to this, I started thinking about diversity and music. First of all, it's like, think if you were just had a drum, like you were just beating the drum and you had nothing else to add, right? And it's like, it should be a symphony. And I said, gosh, that is the cheesiest thing, but it's the truth of why diversity is so important. All of the different things and pieces that we can add once you learn about different sounds or you learn about different cultures. And I just felt sad for all those people that are stuck, unable to open themselves up to different foods and different cultures and different dances. And that was the other thing. There's another theory that if you can't dance to it, it's not music. It was just like this whole thing. It'll blow your mind.
We talked about Baroque in the last episode.
I was trying not to bring up Baroque again. That's nice.
Maybe.
Is it on my like podcast bingo card? That's kind of amazing. But I just find it fascinating. And it's the influence of white supremacy that has been there for hundreds, thousands of years.
Right.
When you think about it, it makes you so angry. And this is what everybody in college today, they're learning today. They call it music theory, period. And it's not music theory.
How fascinating. So we are fortunate here in Phoenix that we have the Musical Instrument Museum. And I forget it's like every country but 2 are represented or something like that. I mean, they have a bazillion instruments. And so each little vignette, you get to hear a different instrument being played. You wear, a little headset thing. And it is fascinating because, to your point, like if you're thinking about just that 1800s, that framework, or if you're working from that, did you say 1800s or 18th century?
It's 18th century.
thank you, sorry, 18th century, and like thinking about that, like how does that actually limit us? And it goes to like, again, going back to the United States and kind of the diversity thing. And of course she's now playing with the toys.
I hear it.
So Olive's here, everybody.
Hi, Olive. But, by the way, when they don't
Yes.
teach music that it developed in the United States in music theory, it doesn't count. That includes jazz. That includes some of the country, all of those things. They don't really exist as a form of music.
And how, like, that just makes me sad. And it's not I like this certain type of music or that certain type of music, and so to not have that is a bummer. It's more if you're not being taught those things or don't acknowledge it as existing.
Yes.
What are you losing out on?
That's right. And they were saying everybody says music is a universal language. It's not.
Right.
It is 18th century European German backed music. Is that there? It isn't a universal language.
That's a bummer. What was the podcast called, or what was the?
I'm gonna find it.
Okay.
But his name, but the
You look it up. I'm gonna keep going on one other point. So. The other thing that like this brings me back to is, kind of, again, bringing it back to the US, as you think about like the structures and all of the things that we have built in the United States, and this goes back, we can dig in deep on legislature and all of the historical things that we have done to keep marginalized groups marginalized. And, and how do we actually think about that in terms of changing it? And, all of these things that are coming up now where people are talking about defunding the police, when people are talking about changing legislature to actually support or to eliminate legislature that has kept people down. And, the example I think is the most stark that so many people know is, when crack cocaine came out, and cocaine, when people were getting arrested for possessing cocaine versus crack cocaine,
mm-hmm.
how that dynamic worked from what they got sentenced and or the sentences that they received. And of course, cocaine was known as a white man's drug.
Mm-hmm.
And you had all of Wall Street basically doing cocaine. And then crack cocaine was considered
Wait, did you just say all of Wall Street? Like, is that fair, really?
I'm sorry. Was I stereotyping or making a generalization?
Inclusive, I guess.
Not inclusive. I was being inclusive of all of Wall Street.
Okay.
No. Fair.
I understand.
No, I should not have said that. That's not appropriate.
Like,
but
all? A lot.
Every last one of them. No. So you had so many people using cocaine, but predominantly white male. And you had crack cocaine, which was predominantly Black and brown people.
Yeah.
And the sentences for crack cocaine were so much worse and were so much tougher. And that was like, again and again, we created legislation to make that true. And then we privatized prisons, and, we can go into that in another episode, but going back to like, how do we think about this from an ally perspective? And how do we think about this from an influencer perspective? It's talking about those things. Yes. And making people aware. And like, I think a lot of times, so you and I have talked about the movie 13th, and even just watching that, and I've now like told every single person, like, if you have not seen that movie, you need to go watch it immediately.
Yes.
Because the fact that I don't think it's not a partisan issue. You see folks from both sides of the aisle, making this true. And in 13th, I think was just a really great way to kind of create awareness and open people's eyes.
It was a smack in the face.
Yeah. Like, this isn't just hey, no, everyone's equal. Everyone has equal footing. We're all coming from the same place. And if you don't acknowledge or don't want to acknowledge that white privilege exists, that movie absolutely is, to your point, it's a slap in the face of, yeah, actually this is a thing. And yes, actually, historically, we've done a really great job of keeping marginalized people marginalized. And that's not something to be proud of.
No, it's not. And so I found it. It's Adam Neely, and talk about influence. He's got 1.15 million subscribers. And the episode is called Music Theory and White Supremacy. And he says music theory is kind of racist. And I don't know why that made me laugh, because he's like, yeah, it's kind of racist.
Just to be clear.
And when you listen to it, he talks about the white racial frame of music theory, different perspectives, and he goes into how music isn't universal, and it doesn't have women's voices, and it doesn't have all of these different groups. And I just, on the one side, it can be overwhelming to think how far we've come so far, but we have so much to go.
Yes.
But on the other one, it's so exciting as a person who's in this work to think of another way of connecting people.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
I think that, but, and also an example of him using his influence. Because he's not a politician. He doesn't talk about those types of things. He's a former jazz musician, and he's totally into music theory. That's what he talks about. And so for him to bring people on, and he brought people from diverse backgrounds to come and have it and talk, and called people out straight.
Right.
And that's the other part. Sometimes you just have to.
Right. Absolutely.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts.
I think that is so, I mean, we've come to a place in time that I think people are afraid to call others out because they don't know what the reaction will be. And because we are in this place, and I will say it is politically, and I will say there's at least one person that's heavily influenced the way that people are interacting with each other differently than they were maybe, 4 years ago. That the unfortunate piece is that it's become so uncivilized, and there's no having a conversation about like, okay, how should we handle this? Or, wow, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me, versus no, F you, you're wrong.
Right.
And I think that's the reaction that so many people are taking, and that's not okay. I do want to switch gears for just a moment.
Okay.
And I want to talk about just the fact that when we talk about, a lot of the things we talk about are awareness. A lot of things we talk about are sharing. And once you know, you can't, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you're aware, you can't not be aware. And I think one of the things that stuck out for me in the debate last week, which we all, I'm, sorry to say, we're all exposed to in one way or another. I don't even want to get into the specifics of like what was said unless you want to go there. But for me, I think the piece that was, SNL just did a skit, of course, last night about it, and they're making fun of it. But there was also this, actually, no, you can't even like make a parody of the complete chaotic situation that occurred last week. And like, what a disservice to every human in the United States, and what an embarrassment to
it is
every
hideous.
person. Like, just absolutely vile and disgusting. And here's the thing, I'm going to say this, and I think most of you know my political stance on things, but both sides interrupted each other. Both sides didn't act respectfully. The moderator didn't act respectfully at times. And like, I'm going to say the word shit show. And, and it's also if we aren't calling each other out on the situation that occurred on Tuesday, meaning if you have friends that have beliefs about who they're going to vote for, or have beliefs about where the US is going, that was such a stark example to go, if nothing else, please look at this.
Yeah.
And please understand what occurred. And there's no more sugarcoating. There's no more, oh, well, that's not what they meant. That's not what he meant. That's not, all of these things. No, you, in your face, were told what people's beliefs were.
Right.
Pure and simple.
Yeah.
And as an ally, as someone that is, focused on this work, I've now had multiple conversations with people that feel differently than I do from a political perspective. And yes, listening to their side, listening to their response, I think is totally what we all should be doing, is listening to each other. But at some point, it's also as an ally, if I'm not saying you're wrong and this is not okay and this cannot continue, then I'm not actually an ally. I'm not actually doing the work that I need
That's
to
the
do.
scariest part
Mm-hmm.
that came out of it, where you just felt. The other thing that we both talk about in this space is of creating safe spaces,
Mm-hmm.
and you just don't feel safe.
No.
Like in general.
Right.
Now, granted, I it was only a matter of time. We were like, oh yeah, there's Joe. Like he was vice president for 8 years. There was a meme that was very funny, and Obama over his head, it says, when they go low, we go high. And then it says, I told him to shut up. And it just was like, oh,
Yeah.
But when you're looking at the situation where it's like, it's beyond not listening, you're being argumentative, you're making things up, you're not paying attention. And when asked, if you basically, this is paraphrasing, I know what they said, this is what I heard, are
Right.
you willing to stand up for people that are being marginalized? And his answer
Right.
was no.
Right. Are you willing to
that's it.
say today
Yeah,
that you will stand with folks that are marginalized?
right.
No.
No.
And I think there was one, and I have it somewhere on my phone, and it's basically like a meme or hey, this is the interpretation of, and it was about cookies. And, and it was the whole question that was asked around, will you renounce these people? So this is from @BrewingAle on Twitter. Do you hate cookies? Sure. Then say I hate cookies. I'm prepared to, but the vegetables are also very hateful. Say I hate cookies, like chocolate chip, oatmeal, chocolate chip. Sure, cookies or something, get the milk, but the carrots. And that's like the perfect analogy for it, because it was like, I'm sorry, what?
What is happening?
What is happening that you literally can't say?
Like, that was a complete softball.
Right. Absolutely. But I also, like, what I have said to my friends is that he can't say that, because he will lose a large group of voters that have said, yeah, he is a racist and we like it. And that's
that's what's so scary about that. And why it's going to be very important that everybody does understand that you do have a circle of influence. You have a circle of influence, whether you think you're being heard or not. People do watch and they do pay attention, regardless of how the outcome is.
Right.
People are going to be very skeptical and hesitant on how we move forward past the next election, regardless. And so we're not talking about holding one over the other, but you have to talk about things that are unfair and unjust.
Right.
And it's going to be, potentially a very difficult day for various groups that are going to need a hug and someone to speak for them if they feel alone. And I think that's what happens when it's the most difficult moments, is having somebody who can listen to you and feel like they have a supportive friend, and being an ally for regardless.
Right. And I think I'm going to go there if you're ready.
Yeah, you can go there.
So, I know that something occurred a few months ago. Actually, has it been a few months? It's been a few weeks, whatever it's been.
Don't ask me. I was
at
trying to go to October and I couldn't remember when that was.
So at your home in Texas, in Waco, Texas, your neighbor put up a flag.
Yes, a Confederate flag.
A Confederate flag. And, you went live on Facebook to share your thoughts. And I'm not going to tell the story. I would love for you to tell the story, but if you're comfortable, and if you're not, then we'll get you a box of Kleenex.
Yes, thank you. No, I'm good. I think I'm good. Because that is I did a lot of stuff came out of that. So what happened is, part of it is Todd had just built me a standing desk outside. And so what was going on is my neighbor put up a Confederate flag, but it wasn't a flag. It was like a wooden permanent piece of art or something. We'll call it that. And they had been building art. I couldn't see anything. Like it all faced in towards the house, except for right eye line, straight line was this Confederate flag. Now I was very triggered, like scared, shaking. Like there is some trauma that's happened in my life that I may not share that part, but there is some trauma that affected me in my life and I just wanted it down. And so Todd, my husband Todd, went over there to have the conversation with them. And so people were asking me because I was so shocked. Like I just didn't know what to do. And I had posted it on Facebook. So a lot of people were engaged in this conversation in Facebook. And Todd came back and they weren't going to take the flag down. I was about to move. Like I was about to go get in a hotel. I needed to leave. I felt unsafe. I felt unsafe for my kids. They, used to like have friends outside and be outside in their backyard, which our backyards faced each other. And I was literally scared to death. And so I went on Facebook Live, honestly and truly, only so I wouldn't have to tell the story to my 25 closest friends that were going to ask me about it.
Right.
And I haven't even checked. I think at one point it was like at I don't know, 3,000 views. I'm sure there was a lot. People shared it with their classes and their friends and their families. Waco's not that big of a place. I was getting stopped at the grocery store that they saw it. It changed people's minds, that they understood about like not seeing color. And the end of it, what I was trying to impart to people is that it's not about just the flag. It's about I'm a human and this hurts me.
Right.
And you should, if you care about me as a person, you would take it down just because it hurt me, not because it's your pride. It's because it hurts me.
Right.
And that's how I address those issues. My husband did not go down over there. And I asked him specifically, I don't want them to take the flag down. I want them to know that it hurts my feelings and see if it takes it down, because that's how we know where somebody stands.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I'm going to point out one piece because I think this is important for the audience to know. Todd is white.
I thought everybody knew. You're right. My husband's white.
Yes. And I point that out just because the fact that, again, this is kind of that allyship in action. And, as the husband of a Black woman, I know you guys have faced different challenges throughout your relationship because of that fact. But this is a great example of, had you gone over there, and I know that you were extremely emotional about it because it was trauma. You were experiencing trauma, and it was live in your face, across the yard. And to have Todd go have that conversation versus you having to have it, I know it was important to you, and it did matter to you because it wasn't you going and having to take care of it, because you have that conversation on the daily of, flag or no flag, there's something that you're having to.
Oh, sure. And he was there for hours, P.S. He was there for hours. And I was already terrified for my life. And I didn't know if he was going to be hurt or killed or insulted. I didn't know what was going to happen. We were, like pass a cup of sugar over the fence type of neighbors, not on my Christmas card list, but I would definitely give them some eggs, if they needed to borrow some eggs.
Right.
And we've had a beer together or whatever. And so there's always that piece where I hoped that they weren't completely racist, but I didn't know.
Right.
I didn't know, but I needed that to be gone.
Right. And it was an act of terror.
Yeah. Fully.
And there is that, you don't know what's behind it. Is it just you're ignorant and don't know that this is not okay? Or, and I can't even give that excuse because it's the 21st century. And if you don't know that the Confederate flag is not okay, then that's a whole nother thing.
This podcast isn't going to help you.
Yeah, I don't have time for that, like right now. But I think that was the other piece too, is that like, yeah, like you said, Todd's over there. I have no idea what's happening. Is he hurt? Like, did they go, screw this and, physically assault him? Who knows?
Right.
And if he's gone hours and hours, you're like, oh, wow, this could be very, very bad.
And just to let everybody know, in case they're wondering, they did take it down.
Mm-hmm.
Hours later, they did take it down.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, we didn't ask them to take it down. We let them know that it hurt and it would be a preference. Like, we understand everybody's individual, because you can't go in somebody's yard and say, take that down. It's like it's well within their right. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier too. Like, there's things that people just try to act like, well, it's my right to do this or whatever. It's like, you're hurting people.
Right. Absolutely.
And if you know you're hurting people, then why would you do that if you knew you were hurting people for your own freedom? What? Just give me a break.
And that's the one that I get so triggered by, is when I'm talking to people and they're like, oh, well, that joke, I was just trying to be silly. And you're like, but you're hurting humans, like another human. And what you're saying is hurtful. It's not funny. It's not okay. It's not, oh, I'm being silly, or this is just who I am, or, oh, that's just Bob and that's how Bob is. No offense to any Bobs out there. I'm sure you're all lovely.
Right.
But like, that's the part that always like gets to me, is also at what point is a joke that belittles or hurts other people funny? And, I know we have, comedians that's what they thrive on. And I never find them funny, because it is like why is this okay? And why is hurting someone what you look at as funny?
Right. I always say, how did you see this going?
Right. Exactly. So anyhow, like, thank you. First of all, thank you for sharing. I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that story, because I think it's important for people to know that in 2020,
yeah,
this is still happening.
This really happens.
And I think so many folks go, oh, that doesn't happen to me, or that doesn't happen in my city, or that does. And yes, it is. It's happening everywhere. And that's the part I think that is so scary, is that it's the people are letting their racism show because they think it's okay right now. And no, it's not. And there is a piece of like, oh, I'd rather know that they are than not. But there's also go crawl back in your hole.
Yeah.
And go away, because it's not okay. And this is not acceptable. But what is one last thing that you would like to talk about, or one last thing that you would like to share, or something that you share within this podcast that you think is critical in regards to allyship or allies? And
I think, well, one of it is that if you are an ally, the difference between being an ally and just a friend, a protective friend, is that you're going to research, you're going to do your part to find these things and educate yourself.
Right.
It's not like some relationship. Let's say I'm your ally, so tell me everything about what it's like to be Black. Tell me what it's like. It's not like that. That you have to do your work, but also you're willing to step up for that person, even when it's not fun and not okay.
Right. And it's not standing up for them and being their voice. It's standing beside them or right behind them, standing at their shoulder.
It's your voice.
Yeah.
And that's where the influence is, because it's your voice. Mm-hmm. It's not, don't be mean to Jackye. It's, this is what the way it is. This is not
okay.
And this is not okay.
Right.
So I think that's important. And then in speaking back to the influence, is understand that you have influence. And when I told that story on Facebook, all I was trying to do was let people know that Todd didn't get beat up. That's all I was trying to do.
Todd is okay, everybody.
I cried and was emotional, and I don't know. I didn't think anybody was going to watch it, because it was like an hour or something. Well, they did. And so I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't even think about like that influence a lot of people, and you don't
Right.
realize how much influence that you have. But as much as opportunity as you have to speak your truth
Mhm.
and be able to help guide people and examples of how you're navigating all this crazy chaos, when you feel comfortable to share,
Right.
because sometimes you're the only voice that somebody could hear.
Yes. Agreed. And I think, from, on both these topics, I know that you're not supposed to label yourself as an ally. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's what action are you actually taking to be an ally? So it's no longer okay just to, one of our, one of the folks that we admire and listen to quite a bit is Karen Catlin, who wrote Better Allies.
Mhm.
And, and she commented a few weeks ago that someone had actually put on their LinkedIn profile that they were an ally, like that was part of their title or whatever. And like, that just seemed odd. And it is odd, like to say, oh, I'm an ally. And I will say, I am someone who will stand at your shoulder. I am someone that will speak up for you. I am someone that will find the platform for you to speak for yourself. And that's kind of the way I look at it. And so none of us is a perfect ally, but the actions that you take are what actually matters. And from from an influencer perspective, you never know who's listening and how impactful that can be. And so, that can be anything from the, hey, I'm at a party and someone tells a joke that is not okay. Someone, says something that is demeaning to another group of individuals. That's when allyship and that's when influence matters. And not to pick a fight, but just say, hey, what do you mean by that? Like, I don't get the joke.
Right.
And like kind of letting them know, and not in a defensive or in a attacking way, but just pausing and like forcing them to pause as well. Like, why would you say that? Like, that's not okay. So yeah. So I want to ask you, because we just shared some, kind of a deep thoughts by Jackye Clayton. What was one thing this week that was amazing?
So I started a new job this week. And that was really amazing. Woo! Lord. That was pretty amazing. But I think one thing that was amazing was I listened to a podcast on diversity advocates that we were talking about from the Forest Center. And I just felt really, really blessed and excited to have a resource of tools. This particular one, I was about the law and diversity recruiting, and it is the best thing. Everybody on the planet should listen to that. But that was really great. And I had tacos this week.
Oh, that is always
like street tacos.
I love that. I was like, oh yeah, those other two are great, but tacos.
Yeah, and tacos.
And tacos, mostly that.
It's lunchtime.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
What about you? What's something great that happened this week?
I signed a new client, and which was awesome. Like, so the nonprofit space has definitely opened up their eyes to how important this is. And you would think nonprofits of all groups would be more socially aware, but it's we do all this stuff for everyone else, but we haven't thought about it for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so signed a new client, which is awesome. And I don't know if I guess I can't share this. Found out that one of my nephews is having another baby. So yeah.
You have like
wife,
13. You're like, I don't know if I could say this. Out of the 20 million nephews?
I have 17, soon to be 18. So yeah, that is kind of cool too. So, and another one of them just learned how to roll over. So yeah, we got babies galore. I have nieces and nephews that are, newborn to 30-ish. So
love that.
Yeah.
I love it. See, I'm glad. We should probably do
Yes.
this on every podcast to share what's good, because we talk about some deep stuff.
Right. Absolutely. So to wrap it up, thank you so much for listening and for joining us. And if you liked what you heard, please do sign up and follow us on YouTube and subscribe to listen and to get updates as they come out. But we will put the resources that we talked about in our show notes. And thank you for listening.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for stopping by. And we'll get together again soon.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.